Hey guys, while I'm here seeing the Statue of David, I thought it would be a good time for us to talk about our traditional arts of Asia and Africa as well. So let me share my screen and we'll get started. This is lesson 16, again, traditional arts of Asia and Africa. So we left off last time in lesson 15 with talking about the earliest art up until the Bronze Era. And so we're kind of skipping around a little bit, but I just wanted to put a disclaimer on traditional arts of Asia and Africa. Different regions of the world attach different values to different things. Western history, like with the Statue of David behind me here, have taught us to believe that good art is art that depicts representational imagery in idyllic proportions, like our friend David right here. You've never seen him before. Um, this lesson will explore traditional customs and values throughout many parts of the world. So try and keep an open mind and make sure that you are not comparing the Western values with the non-Western values, which are the non-Western being Asia and Africa. So let's talk about arts of Asia first, getting into India. Also, another like little tiny disclaimer, I guess, or big disclaimer. Regardless of the area, early art is highly influenced by religion, and so when we look at a lot of his early artwork, whether it's in India, Japan, Africa, even European artwork, religion is a very influential part of that artwork being made. And not just Christianity, but we see Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, Hinduism, and lots of other religions as well that we'll talk about. India specifically, though, follows mostly Buddhism and Hinduism, and these play a huge role in their traditional arts and architecture. We're not going to talk too much about the Hinduism art, more so we're going to focus on Buddhism art, but we may, get into this a little bit later. I also wanted to give a reminder that although you probably just wrapped up here recently on your midterm project, we do have a final project as well that is going to ask you to investigate three art periods that we have discussed, or maybe not even discussed throughout our art history section. So if something here sticks out to you, just make a little mental note of it. Maybe if you're doing the skeletal notes, maybe just put a little asterisk beside of it, and you could potentially come back to that to talk about with your final project. So again, if you're following on with the skeletal notes, this is kind of going to be the setup for each of the different regions. But some themes and motifs that we're going to look at within Indian artwork, we see a lot of symbolism being used, specifically through their imagery. So for an example, a lotus flower could represent purity and spiritual growth. And we'll get into some more specifics as well. Just even like little tiny things. Just note all of those little things that stick out to you. Some other things that we see within Indian art are their intricate details and vibrant colors. And their color, this maybe links back to that conversation that we had when we were talking about paint and where different regions of the world traditionally get their pigments from different plant matter, different natural material. And so we may think that India may have had plant matter or other natural material that led itself to these more vibrant colors. Specifically, we'll see a lot of rich blues and greens and yellows. Let me move my little box over here now. Um, so this piece that we're going to look at here, this is the carved stone standing Buddha. Traditionally, the Buddha was not depicted in Buddhist artwork. It was thought to be sort of taboo, and we'll talk about that in a couple more slides as well. But this is a little bit later in the traditional art, so we start to see the Buddha actually being depicted. But I use this example just to show you many different small symbolism moments, even in just, seemingly normal portraits like this. One thing that we see is, and it's not a great angle for it, but these long earlobes that we see here, this is a reference to generational upper class. And so we see the Buddha as being sort of a figure of importance and of society, as well as religion. And so he has those long earlobes. Another thing that we notice is the top knot here. This hairdo with these like little kind of raised bumps on it indicates that this is a person that has been enlightened, and obviously Buddha is like the ultimate person of enlightenment, so he's going to have that hairstyle. And then one more thing, this kind of goes beyond just Buddhism, but into other religions, Christianity, Hinduism, this halo behind the head here. This is very indicative of the religious importance, spiritual importance that this figure has. Sometimes in more complex stories where there's like multiple characters, especially in Christianity, we start to see that a lot of figures have halos while others don't have halos, and that kind of helps us to tell the story a little bit better as well. Some architectural examples from Buddhism. Instead of these grand temples and churches and things like this, we see what is called a stupa. A stupa is a dome-like structure evolved from earlier burial mounds. And we'll also see that there are these four gates that are always outside of the stupas. Um, and this is actually the stupas, you weren't really meant to go inside of them, but more so the people that were that were religious, and using this architecture would walk around the outside of it in this path. And this was sort of to help them reach a state of meditation, help them to gain enlightenment. And this one's particularly, this is the Great Stupa at Sanchi, probably one of the most notable ones and the oldest ones that are still intact. It was built over the period of about 200 years. And these gateways that we talked about, the cardinal gateways on each side, they actually have these really complex sculptures in relief, specifically low relief when it's more like a coin and it's not so much projected out. And this depicts the story of Buddha's life. And so while you're walking, while you're meditating, you can be looking at this sculpture as well to help you kind of reach the point of that you want to contemplate what it is that you are searching for, what you are thinking about. Um, and this is early Buddhist architecture, so we don't see Buddha actually depicted, but imagine this as being like the story of the Bible or the story of Jesus's life that's all carved out around this path. Okay, moving on to arts of Asia and China, which differs a lot from our Indian arts. And that should say themes and motif in Chinese art, not Indian art. So a big one, we see nature, especially in painting. There's a big crossover with nature and watercolor painting with calligraphy. When we get down here, the intricate details and calligraphy style. There's a lot of overlap with those processes. And then also within porcelain, which is a big part of Chinese traditional arts, porcelain ceramics, we see very intricate details done with blue glazes. And we'll talk about that in a second. So there's a lot of interaction of traditions of Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. I don't expect you to know, the whole philosophies behind all of those, but what I do want you to think about is that along with nature, um, traditional arts of China really value and really sort of go into their more philosophical side, which is to honor ancestors, a big sort of focus on the afterlife. So much so that this emperor, I'm just going to say Emperor Q because I don't want to botch this name. He was a very important emperor. He unified China before his death, and he was very intent upon guarding his afterlife. So he had these 6,000, if you can see them here, they're so tiny that they kind of just become almost like a texture. But there are 6,000 terracotta warriors that are lined up to protect him in his final resting place. These are all cast, and so they look very similar to one another, but still incredibly impressive. And if you've ever watched I think there's an Indiana Jones movie about it where it's something similar to this, but all of these little soldiers kind of come to life to actually like defend the tomb. But yeah, it's just very kind of pop culture kind of thing. Another tradition that we see within Chinese arts is the Chinese painting tradition, which combines calligraphy and landscape. The painting and the writing were very closely related, and the same brushes and the inks were used for both. And so obviously they're going to have a lot of the same qualities. One of the most notable artists was Fan Quan, and if you just look up Chinese landscape painting, he's probably one of the first names that'll come up. This is one of his paintings among mountains and stream that kind of gained the most popularity for him. Um, he really kind of dramatized nature, never painted from real life though, which is kind of interesting, but he kind of was allowed to make more like dramatic, emotion-filled choices with what the artwork looked like rather than it just being, a normal landscape. So big giant mountains, like dramatic waterfalls, very lush looking. But if you can see with this, it looks very similar to calligraphy style as well. That black sort of washes the whole look. And then also, going back to the porcelain, Chinese ceramics were a really, really huge part of our Chinese traditional arts. So, porcelain, if you don't know about porcelain, it's a very rare type of clay. It's very expensive. It's kind of difficult to work with because of how soft it is. It's almost like cream cheese texture. And it also turns very white when it's fired, whereas like other kinds of clay, they're going to turn more of like a brown or beige color, but porcelain has this stark, vivid white. Um, and it also has to be fired a lot hotter than regular types of clay. And so, because of that, blue was initially the only color that could withstand those high firing temperatures, which is why a lot of the design, or most of the designs are done in sort of a range of like monochromatic blues. This tradition kind of carried over for a few centuries. This is done, I don't know when this died, so mid 14th century. Um, and then this same kind of technique just gained in popularity, even so much so that it came over to the Western world. And we now, a lot of the times if your grandparents or parents receive like a china set or something for their wedding, that's not really something that people do anymore. But it's a lot of the time kind of looks similar to this design, very intricate painted details, usually in the color of blue. Okay, now moving on to the arts of Asia and Japan. So, some visual themes that we see here in motifs are again nature and spirituality, but also this feeling of humility, simplicity, and getting back to the roots of nature. So, while Japan and China, they do have some similarities, some crossovers, Japan was sort of able to exist and like grow by itself. Sort of how like Egypt grew from Mesopotamia, like they, were growing, but they're separate. And so Japanese art kind of was able to do the same thing. So the primary religion that we see in traditional Japan is the religion of Shinto. This is a religion of nature and ancestral worship. And instead of having like one or two gods that, we have names for and like exist, sort of as these independent beings, the Shinto religion acknowledged that the gods sort of exist in forests, fields, waterfalls, big stones, trees, anything in nature is kind of where the gods exist within. It's not so much like there's one god. This architectural piece here is the Katsura Detached Palace, and it is a tea house. But I really just included this to kind of show how humble and simple a lot of their architecture was. You see like the moss sort of like growing on the roof there. And it almost sort of blends into nature, making this sort of like pond and like, these few isolated trees and stone more of the focus than the actual architecture itself. Really, really embodies this attitude of simplicity, naturalness, and humility. And looking at some paintings done from Shinto, hand scrolls were very common during this time, like where you kind of roll them out and you can kind of store them a little bit easier. And ironically, these artworks were not quite as simplistic as the architecture that we see is. Um, but they used these hand scrolls to kind of tell these stories that would, kind of give a name and a face to the gods. This example here is an example of a thunder god who wreaks havoc on a courtly gathering down below. And the scroll reflects the strong role nature plays in the Shinto beliefs. They believed that, if something was going wrong or if like they weren't doing, if society was like, becoming corrupt, whatever it might be, that natural disasters would follow. And that was sort of their way of being punished for not behaving the way that they should. Or if, just a random storm came out of somewhere, they believed like, oh, we might not know it, but we're not doing something right here. We're not following the path that, the gods want us to. Another religion within traditional Japan is Zen Buddhism, which is similar to Buddhism, where they still acknowledge Buddha as the main figure, same kind of principles as Buddhism, but again, more of a focus on the simplicity and reaching enlightenment through meditation. So essentially, like less is more. This is a painting, and it's very different than the Fon Quan painting that we saw back here in the Chinese arts, where it fills the whole page, very dramatic. There's no kind of like empty spaces. But here we have this worldliness down here, this like nature being depicted, and then all this empty space up here at the top that's sort of left for like the mind. Essentially, it's like, reaching that state of meditation and like that emptiness, that solitude is what this wants to indicate towards. So while not including anything, they're actually saying a lot. Alrighty, moving on to our last bit here. I'm going to kind of group together, and not because I want to, but because just for the sake of time and the way that our class has to work, we're going to kind of loop a lot of the customs and traditions of arts of Africa into one category. So there's a lot of themes and motifs that we see here. We see a lot of intricate patterns, textures, and non-objective designs in African art. And this is really different than a lot of the artwork that we see elsewhere, where they are okay with not representing anything realistic, going totally non-objective sometimes. It's all about patterns and textures and sort of like, the decorativeness of it. Additionally, going back to our craft versus fine art video that we watched in Module 5, their art is about community. While Europe, in the 1500s had this big shift from creating artwork in groups to creating artwork as individuals, and we start seeing those individual names like Michelangelo and Raphael and Da Vinci. Um, Here we see that community, that sense of like each person has a part of the job still stays and is still kind of part of their traditions. Um, so again, art is about community, art is made collectively and not individually. And that still is kind of how it goes today, honestly. They also enjoy pushing the abstraction of the human form. So, simplifying, exaggerating, distorting in some ways, but keeping, ideal proportions like our Europeans are at the time and, sort of grow to want to have in all of their artwork. It's not something they're concerned with here. You can even see it in this artwork that I have over here on the right. There are varying styles among different parts of the continent, and I wish we could talk about all of them, but that's just something important to know that just because we are sort of generalizing, there's so many differences between tribes, between cultures, between parts of the region that are, significant for sure. And then lastly, there is a huge focus on textiles, clay, and bronze sculptures, as well as ornate clothing and masks used for religious and ceremonial purposes. So essentially, what I want to get at here is that art is still being made collectively. They're not concerned with realism, and they are not concerned with having their art be non-functional. So, like paintings and sculptures, these are things that are just meant to be looked at, but African artwork is meant to be used as well for, clothing or, religious ceremonial, ceremonies, like whatever it might be. And we'll see some examples of those as we move forward. Okay, so this is from the Yoruba culture. This is just a male portrait head done in bronze casting. And this is pretty natural. I just kind of wanted to show you guys this to know that like, they can do realism. It's not that they don't want to make artwork that is realistic. It is that they are choosing to go in a different direction to push other aspects and value different things than just trying to make things proportionally accurate. For example, for example, Cameroon artists, they will reinterpret, not copy the human head. They're pushing the boundaries of abstraction. And this is what influences later artists like Picasso. So this here, again, this is still a human head, still referencing the human body. It is abstract, not non-representational, but it is simplified in a lot of ways. The nose has been sort of exaggerated. The eyebrows or eyelids here have been, extended. The cheekbones are like super prominent. The head is sort of like squished in a way. But again, we still know it's, referencing the natural. And I'm going to go into like a little tiny mini rant here. But artists like Picasso, so Picasso's kind of story is that he was a Spanish artist and he went to Africa to, just make artwork to like look and see what they were doing. And then he sees, oh, they're doing this like so differently. I can come back and, do this in Spain. So he does. He, learns and like, practices in their style for, several months probably. And when he comes back, he's like, look at this new type of art that I'm making. I'm going to call it Cubism. And so this credit doesn't really get it brought back to the African artists who were like, wait, we've been making artwork like this for centuries. Like, this isn't anything new. Like, Cubism isn't like a new thing. This is just what you're calling our type of art. So a lot of borrowing without, crediting early on. Now we can recognize that, but for a very long time, we just think about Picasso as being this ingenious, like, new pushing, cutting edge guy. But he takes a lot of influence from others as well. Now, pottery, African artists were very, very skilled in pottery as well. Pottery production is seen in Africa before anywhere else in the world, and that's because they used this method called the coiling method. So that this doesn't involve like a wheel or like, any type of further technology. They're just rolling out clay into these big kind of like snake shapes and then coiling it around itself to make their pots and, different vessels and things. Interestingly, pottery is mostly done by the women in the tribes. It's not very much a male based type of artwork. Also, with African masks, just because something is a mask doesn't mean that it's not art. It can be used, doesn't mean it's not art. From Male, we see these carved wooden antelope figure headdresses that we see in this photo here. These are used with the performance of dance as well and are used to imitate African mythology. So these like different characters and animals and things are carved into the headdresses. And like I said, lots of African art is used primarily for religious or ceremonial purposes. So headdresses, masks, talisman, charms, textiles, vessels, all of these things have dual purposes. They are meant to be beautiful and aesthetically pleasing, but also they have a use for them and they're not just meant to be looked at. And lastly, Ghana and Angola. These regions are very highly skilled in textile arts. Many styles have very specific uses. So, for example, this is the kente cloth pattern that they've developed. And this is traditionally worn when something unprecedented happened. It was very famously worn by Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana when he won their national election for president. And that was a very big, significant moment in their government. And so it only made sense for them to use this cloth to indicate that change that was happening. But again, very, very highly skilled and developed in weaving, embroidery, all, craft things, but take a lot of skill to really get good at. They had this technique called the cut pile embroidery. This is one of the continent's oldest textile traditions, meaning it's one of the world's oldest textile traditions. And it's a callback to creating artwork in a collective way rather than focusing on the individual. So in this type of artwork, men are going to weave the cloth, so like just plain design without any pattern or anything. And then the women are going to embroider by lacing these dyed strips over top of it and then embroidering them onto the fabric itself. And just some modern influences because we didn't get to really separate things as much as I would have liked to. Um, Kende Wiley is also a great artist to do research on if you want to maybe look at his artwork for our final project or for another assignment in this class. But Kende Wiley, he is a African American artist based, or his heritage is from Nigeria. And in a way to connect his Nigerian roots to his artwork, he uses their traditional textile designs and patterns in his paintings. Sometimes he'll paint them. I've seen a few of them though, where I've researched a few where he'll actually have like traditional artists in Nigeria paint these designs first, and then he will go back on top of them and paint his portraits. Wiley's paintings also depict African Americans in the same poses of European Renaissance master paintings. So, like our, Leonardo da Vinci's and Michelangelo's and Raphael, same positions. So it's like familiar, but it's something different, sort of. So Wiley sees this as a way of borrowing influence from the traditional European artist as they borrowed from his ancestors' culture for hundreds of years without crediting them. So very impactful, very significant, great artist to look at. He also painted the Obama portrait back in, 2008, whenever that was, 2000, not 2008, 2016. Um, and yeah, he's just a very significant artist with, very tight roots to his culture. But that is it for our lesson 17. I know this was like a little bit longer, so I'm sorry about that. We are going to jump back into lesson 17 next time, and that is going to cover our Western artwork from the Renaissance through the Baroque period. So, hope you guys enjoyed, and we will talk again next time.